we go on to look at what UNESCO says. By the way, UNESCO is a guideline. I personally feel each country or each community would have to make that decision as to what is intangible heritage, how they want to save it. UNESCO gives you examples, but not exhaustive examples. Okay? You have to bear that in mind. Personally, I feel the community decides what and how it wants to save it. Here's the depth. Can you all see this? Is it legible? Now, intangible cultural heritage means I have put in the numbers. The UNESCO definition does not have that number, those numbers. So I have divided into 6 criteria in order for, this is for the listing purposes, but generally you can use that information to understand intangible heritage. This is a definition. Practices, representation, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith. The communities, this is a very important bit. Communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognized as part of their cultural heritage. It is very much a bottom-up approach. It's the community that decides what is their heritage, their intangible culture. Not organizations like museums or the state, but unfortunately, when you inscribe an intangible cultural heritage, the state takes the decision rather than the community. We'll come on to that later. And secondly, transmitted from generation to generation. It comes down to generation. And in coming down, it evolves, it changes. Like you're saying, the folk song now includes modern songs as well, modern folk songs as well. So it changes to adapt to its environment, its circumstances, whether it's social, political, religious, or otherwise, yeah, environmental. So it changes. It's constantly recreated by communities and groups in response to their environment, their interaction with nature and their history, and provides them with a sense of identity and continuity. We talk a lot about identity, and we will talk about the downside of identity, identification, who are you and all of that. It has negative side as well. But people use, this is my tradition, this is the way I was brought up, this runs in my blood. You've heard all of those kind of saying. So they identify with the tradition, it's meaningful, or it's memory of something that happened, and that memory is triggered off certain practices, rituals, or whatever, even songs, chanting. So that's that. Thus promoting respect for cultural diversity and human creativity. That's idealistic. UNESCO hopes that by understanding intangible culture, each other's culture, we respect each other's culture. But do we? We can talk about later, but that is the aspiration. And then for the purpose of this convention, consideration will be given solely to such intangible cultural heritage as is compatible, this is quite important, compatible with existing international human rights instruments, as well as the requirement of mutual respect among communities, groups, individuals, and sustainable development. I know you're going to do with our move about human rights, but does it conflict with basic rights, individuals' freedom, conflicts, does it promote conflicts, those sort of things. But there are other legislation in the state, like you might have equality legislation, for example, human rights legislation, for example. So you have to comply. It has to be operated within those legislation, which promotes respect for each other, cultural traditions, as well as each other's cultural rights and human rights. So it is not practiced by itself, just because, some cultural traditions could be very negative. And do you want to promote that? If it looks down upon another community or another society or another tradition, it makes it feel inferior. Do you promote that? No. We will come on to the negative aspects later. These are the, you very rightly identified oral traditions, expressions, including language, only for the purpose of transmission, not language in its own right. If a language is dying out and it's supposed to, you have to use it to transmit to the next generation, you preserve that language or you revive that language. Performing arts, social practices and festive events, nature and universe, knowledges and practices regarding nature and universe, and traditional craftsmanship. I'll give you some examples in a minute. But no strict boundaries between the domains. They overlap each other. There's not always a strict boundary. Yeah? You can do oral tradition using performing arts. You can sing, you can chant, you can read poetry. It's performance on a stage or somewhere in this cultural space, but it is oral tradition. So there is an overlap. Yeah? You use several sometimes overlap with one another. Now, here are some examples. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is for you to understand what some of the examples are. You have proverbs, riddles, tales, nursery rhymes, legends, myths, epic songs, charms, it goes on. And then oral tradition, how do you transmit knowledge and social and collective memories play a critical role in keeping culture alive. Performing arts, vocal and instrumental music, dance, theatre, pantomime, sunburst, body decoration used in dance, scenery, masks, cultural spaces, props. So it has both objects as well as the practice going together. Rituals and festive events, and social practices and rituals and festive events, habitual activities, annually done, weekly done, structure of lives of communities, groups are shared by relevant to many of the members in the community. They affirm the identity of those who practice them as a group or society. So it is a group identity. Particular group practice these things, as you were talking about earlier. And the rituals may help to mark the passing of seasons, events in agricultural calendar, or stages in person's life. You have rituals from birth to death. Funeral is a ritual. Birth celebration is a ritual. In between you have landmarks, yeah, and you celebrate that. That's a ritual. Huge amount of rituals goes on from the time you are born, from the time you die. I don't know about in Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, but certainly the Indians, any opportunity that's a ritual. Yeah. We celebrate everything in our lives. Living is a ritual every day. You get up, you pray, you do a puja. On Mondays you don't eat, Tuesdays don't eat meat. Fridays you don't eat meat, and then you have fasting days. It's all life. Living is ritual. So that knowledge and practices concerning nature and universe. It's about relationship with the environment. It's about relationship with the land. It's skills, practices, representation developed by communities by interacting with natural environment, expressed through language or oral. People after farming sing. It's about celebrating the day's work, or it's about festive harvesting. So attachments towards a place, you sing about a place, or you talk about a place, you share memories about a place. And spirituality and the worldview, lots of spiritual, holy medicines, healing practices, what you call it, your stars every day. You read your horoscope, all of those sort of things become part of it. Astronomy becomes part of it. Craftsmanship. This will probably grow through lots of the other domains. Creating soft and hard materials and rituals involved in making them tools, objects, wood carving, tree coppicing, stone wall making, building, etc. So, key points to bear in mind. There's always an overlap between domains. Language, I've told you, is not protected in its own right, but safeguarded only as a vehicle for transmission. It's a community, I mean, this is a very important thing. Up till this convention, it has always been top down. The state tells, or the museum tells, or the heritage sector tells communities what is heritage. But here, the community or the individual practitioner or a group of people decide what is important for them. And that's why it was kept hidden for such a long time, buried in the community. It's a bottom-up approach. It's embodied in the community. The community is intangible cultural heritage, or individuals who own the tradition. Cultural traditions, so they have a right to decide on which and what to safeguard, celebrate, and pass on to the next generation. It's constantly changing in response to the environment and changes in the environment, and it may not be just rooted in Lithuania, Estonia, Poland. You might have the same practiced differently in another country. It may have roots in another part of the world, which has traveled here, or community has settled here, and they have reinvented it to suit the local environment. Food is a classic case in point. When we move, when we migrate, we make changes in the way we cook, and we take on the same cooking practices, but you use different food stuff in different countries, whatever is available. Yeah? Do you recognize that? If you're going to live in another part of the world, would you be cooking Lithuanian food? Or would you modify it? You do the same, maybe you cook red cabbage, but you might cook it differently depending on the ingredients that are available to you. Yeah? Do you cook red cabbage? Or it's a Polish dish, isn't it? Red cabbage. Do Lithuanians cook red cabbage? Yeah. You do? There you are. I was right. You have to prioritize. You cannot safeguard everything. And it becomes a competition unless the community wants it. And how much do you safeguard? And what are you safeguarding it for? That's an important question. There is no one answer to that. It has to be between the community and the agencies to decide what to do safeguard. I've said that many of our living is intangible cultural aid. At last count, when I looked at it, it might have gone up a bit now. Only 174 states had ratified the convention. Lithuania in January 2005. Okay? You had it 2004, probably started that, it became enforced in 2005. What is safeguarding? It means measures aimed at ensuring the viability of the intangible cultural heritage, including you identify first, second, you document it, third, use research, preservation, protection, promotion, enhancement, particularly through formal and non-formal education, as well as the revitalization of various aspects of such heritage. You've identified some methodology of how to safeguard it. Again, sometimes people revive something that's died, that's gone out of practice, and then start practicing again. So the transmission may not have happened, so they revive it and then they start transmitting. In the revival, things change as well. Yeah, you introduce new elements to make it more glossy or more interesting or whatever. The purposes of the convention: to safeguard intangible cultural heritage, respect of the intangible cultural heritage of communities, groups and individuals concerned, raise awareness at local, national, international levels of the importance of intangible culture and mutual appreciation, to provide for international cooperation and assistance. Okay? Those are the key purposes of the convention. Now, that is only a guideline. It's up to you and the communities that you work with to decide what else is intangible cultural heritage, how to preserve it. Be flexible. It's a new convention. It is the push the boundaries out. Lots of people say you must ratify to be properly intangibilized. Maybe there's no such term, but you know what I mean. There's no need for that. In my position, we are not. I will just in a minute I'll tell you. We haven't ratified, but I believe that it has been happening for so many decades without the ratification. Why suddenly bring a ratification, reorganize everything, and throw out some things and keep some things? Let the communities enjoy and decide what is. But of course, you know, it helps. I mean, there is a lot of issues about ratification and nomination processes, and we will discuss this when we come to the negative side of intangible cultural heritage. Let's move on to intangible cultural experience in a very culturally diverse setting. I'm going to take you to the UK as experience, how it's addressed in the UK. You know, Britain is a very multicultural nation. So you can imagine the layers of intangible cultural heritage in Britain. You know, there is always this debate about who's British, who's English, who's Scottish. It's a nationalistic environment where people want to differentiate themselves. Because of migration, there is a big debate about identity at the minute. It has been going for a decade, and in fact, what is to be a British? Who is British? Who is English? Who is Scottish? We have the population is about 65, but recently they announced, this is a 2011 census, the 10-year census, they recently announced it's gone up by another to 270. But my estimation usually is higher than the census. Not everybody responds to census, so it's usually higher than that. I would put it, personally, another 10 on it. Yeah. England is the largest nation. Scotland, as you can see, is 5.4, Wales 3.1, Northern Ireland 1.8. The other states have, devolved states have smaller population, but England is the biggest population. The Scottish, the Welsh, and the Northern Irish have very clearly identify themselves. But England is a mixed bag. The English people are still trying to find out what English means. But English means so many different things to so many different people. You know, they're still arguing about what does English means, because England has never clarified itself as to what its identity is. Good thing, really. The categories, I took this from you know, when you apply for a job or when you go to education, they categorize ethnic group, ethnicity. And here it is. Look at the categories. You know, whose cultural heritage are we protecting? It's quite an important question. But strangely, they have coexisted without any problems. Every year there are celebrations. Everybody enjoys. Everybody goes to each other's celebration. No conflict. But when you talk about identity, then you have levels of identity. The white English, the black English, the Asian English, the Gypsy who have settled, Irish travelers, Irish, English. So it changes. And then you have people who are born in Britain and people who have migrated to Britain. They are two separate categories. So it is a very, very complex community with layers and layers and layers of heritage and shared heritage as well. Remember, some of these countries have been colonies, so they bring heritage. Their heritage has already been brought to England before they even arrived here, because the British brought back some of the cultural traditions, modified, but nonetheless, food and other words, language and so on, they brought back. It's just now dividing it into population, the number of people. The largest minority group is the Asian Indian, which is 1.5 million. And then you have the Pakistani, almost 2 million. You have Bangladeshi. I mean, everybody says you're an Asian. Asia is a big continent, and there are different sections to Asia. You have the Pakistani, the Bangladeshi, South Indians, North Indians from Punjab. So it is, they all have different traditions as well, cultural traditions. We just lump them together as Asian. So they're beginning to break it down more. You have the Chinese, Black British, African British, and mixed race. People who intermarry, whose cultural traditions are they following? There's a big debate about mixed children, mixed race children. They want to share both traditions, cultural traditions, white and black, white and Asian, Asian black. It's a lot of that is happening now. Meghan Markle is one example. She is African, Black American, but she says I'm half white, half Black American. I'm biracial. So those kinds of debates are happening. They all have implications for cultural traditions, intangible cultural traditions as well. We can't see very well. Okay. Now, English folk dancing, Morris dancing. Morris dancing happens across the European countries. It's not just an English event. So the roots and the spread is wide. It's not just one. This is a shared heritage. It may be presented differently, but the roots are the same. Yeah. This is a very traditional fete, English fair. But today's fair, you saw the folk dance and the festival. They're quite different. It's changed. This was the original traditional fair, how people dressed up in the old days. So how far we've come. Village fetes, donkey races, we've come, we still do donkey races for children, but not in that way. It's much different. And this is the Caribbean Carnival. You might have heard of the carnival in Notting Hill, which as a result of a conflict. It arose because there was a conflict between white and black youth. And as a result, the black community set up a committee to fight back, to raise awareness, and Carnival became a symbol of that. So it happens every year. It has a million audience. International, people come from all over the world to experience a carnival. It goes over 2 days in August bank holiday. And there's a lot of issue about it because the Notting Hill used to be where the Caribbean settled, a lot of the Caribbeans. But subsequently, in the recent decades, it's been gentrified. You have film stars living there now, and you have rich brokers, stockbrokers, and people who are very, a lot of money, and celebrities live there. But they want to move it from that area because there's too much noise, too many people, too many incidents. They want to move it to Hyde Park. But the community says this is our cultural space, this is where it was born, we want to keep it here. So there is a battle still going on between the state and the community. So that's some of the conflicts you will face as you get working with intangible heritage. You see, there's always a police presence, there's always conflict, there's always issues before it starts. They still talk about moving it, or there is not enough policing, or there is too many pickpocketing. That's Eid. This is a Muslim festival, and that little space, a Trafalgar Square fountain space, has become a cultural space. Most of the festivals, although they happen everywhere else as well, but there's always an event held there as part of the London celebration. The mayor usually organises that. This is a temple in Neasden, in West London. I don't know if you know about the Wembley Stadium. Yes? It's not very far from the football stadium. Very far from there. This is an iconic temple built in Indian tradition. We talk about crafts. They brought in craftsmen from India, and they brought all the material from India to build this temple. It's beautifully detailed and very, very ornate and very opulent and, I'm going to say, glamorous. So that's the temple. And it's in the Indian traditional craft used and skills and material used who are imported from India. So this, what I'm trying to get at is we do it every day, but we don't realize we're doing it in the intangible culture. But people are beginning to realize, now we raise awareness about it, people are beginning to realize what intangible culture is. They're starting to take more pride in it and want to preserve it and want to showcase it. Negative aspects. Everything has a downside to it. It's nothing always positive. Who decides on inscribing a project? Who decides what is worth saving? The community. But often with the intangible heritage, the criteria for selection of projects for inscription is decided by the state. It's not really the community. The communities have very little input into it. Because it becomes a very popular tradition and it becomes unique, it reflects the heritage of the land, the nation, it gets inscribed. So that's one thing which is the downside of the UNESCO guidelines and inscription process and the convention. Management of traditions with potential to violate human rights. For example, oppression of minority cultures or by majority population on the grounds of religion or cultural faith. I mean, you've heard about homophobia. Some religions don't permit homosexuality. So that is one aspect which, interestingly, heritage has shied away from dealing with anything with the homosexuality issues. Nobody has researched into, maybe I'm wrong, into the heritage aspects of homosexuality as a subject, as a tradition, as a cultural issue. There are different people talking about it and present it, but not as part of heritage. It's part of how the brain functions, whether it's genetics or whether it's environment that creates homosexuality, those sort of things. So that is important. Oppression of minority. Again, if you look at, often they think people from outside of Britain, it's a minority culture, therefore it's exotica. It's exotic, nothing more than that. Ours is a real culture. There's no recognition of that as a tradition. So it can come and go, it can be seasonal. When we feel like it, we bring it out. When we don't feel like it, we won't fund it. So that's a minority culture being oppressed by a majority culture, a religious belief. I mean, Catholics and Protestants, I mean, in Ireland, you must have heard about the conflict there. You know, my religion is superior, no, it's my religion is superior in Northern Ireland. Big wars have been fought over religion. You have the Crusaders and the Muslims. You know, religion can be oppressive as a cultural tradition. Gender inequalities, we talked about female. There are some games where females are not allowed to play, some traditions where females are not allowed to do. So there is inequality. That is shifting. And like female genital mutilation, exclusion of women from traditional sports and craft. The danger of racist stereotyping of minority culture as exotica, inferior to Western material heritage. You know, the West has a superior heritage and to the East or other parts of the world. Fossilization and folklorization of heritage, you know, for purposes of tourism. You just keep the heritage as it, or distort it to attract attention from tourists. They are big issues and they cannot be addressed by one sector. We'll come back to that later, how we address these issues. Female genital mutilation. This is a big problem. I recently chaired Open University research board. Part of the research focused on female genital mutilation. What is happening in Kenya, this research was in Kenya, they're beginning to introduce the same tradition but without the cutting, without the traumatic cutting. So that is changing to meet with human rights law. Cornish mummies, darky days, midwinter celebration. In Cornwall, after Christmas, nearer the New Year, they paint their faces black and they go into pubs singing rude songs very derogatory songs about black people. The history says that black people arrived on the shores and everybody was scared. They ran into pubs and started shouting, the darkies are here, and some of the words are quite derogatory. So that tradition still goes on in Cornwall. There's been a debate about it, even in Parliament, it shouldn't happen. But Cornish people are saying, this is our cultural tradition. We've practiced it for centuries, so we're going to keep it. Yeah. So it shows some of the, I mean, they haven't resolved it, it still goes on. The key points for Britain in terms of defining heritage. Whose heritage? Who are we to define? What is heritage? So we decided the individuals define their heritage, communities define their own heritage. I work for Heritage Lottery Fund. It is by now is probably invested 6 billion. And we took the view that we cannot define other people's heritage. There isn't one definition that encapsulates everything. So heritage has to be defined from people's point of view. It's their heritage, they define it. There isn't a national policy or definition of intangible cultural heritage as well. So we're using UNESCO guidelines, but we're working, using it just as a framework, but we include other things that we feel should be in there. The self-definition, well, it suits the 2003 convention. The tendency, I don't know whether, I think Lithuania also has that. Focusing on oral traditions is easy, the storytelling, the chanting, and the singing, rather than other 5 domains. So it's largely the oral tradition has been the focus. And crafts is much more recognized because it's doing things, you know, building, stone wall building, or anything that's to do with hands and tools, crafts, sculpturing, that's recognized. NGOs, there are organizations set up like the Crafts Council, Heritage Craft Council, and other bodies like the English Folklore Society, Song and Dance Society. They all are working individually. They're not combining together to look at the whole picture. We have been doing intangible cultural heritage for 4 decades at least, the conceptualization. Since 1976, the Local Government Act said all local government have the responsibility to provide leisure and entertainment services. As part of it, there was a community movement, arts movement, which wanted and campaigned for social benefits of arts on individuals and community development. So they set up local arts council, who funded lots of projects, arts projects. Arts projects is about intangible cultural heritage, whether it's in the, takes part in the local community space, or holding reminiscent events, sense of place, local monuments, landscapes, cemeteries, heroes, culinary and harvest festival, religious festivals, recording oral history. All of this has happened for 4 decades or more. Communities are given grants to develop this, but that has been cut back, and they showcase it generally in streets, housing estates, market squares, libraries, parks, civic halls and theatres. And then you have community cohesion. People came together. That creates community cohesion, and it provides, then strengthens local identity. It promotes equality, and diversity principles underpin the programs. And what was interesting in that decade, there was a fusion between white, black, Asian culture and identity and creativity. And this is a cultural theorist, Stuart Hall. He referred to that kind of fusion as a growing awareness by the marginalized of the power of representation and their growing desire to write their own. He also stressed the need to record the creative cultural explosions among minorities and maintain repositories of migrants' experience in order to prevent the younger generation growing up to be culturally monolingual. So the future generation is not going to be English, it's going to be a mixed bag. So how do you give them a culture that represents all their values, all their experiences, all their backgrounds? And in order to do that, you really need to capture it and store it so that the future generation can have access to it. And Nazim Khan, who at that time wrote a report, The Arts Britain Ignores, she referred to minority communities' art that had not been recognized until 1970s, in the 80s. She wrote a report saying this is the art that has been ignored and needs to be brought back into focus. What now needs to happen is more practical examples, matching the theoretical framework. And we haven't got enough practical examples to showcase. And we need to think beyond the most simple way of saying this is intangible culture, it's exotic, it's lovely, the tourists are brought in to showcase an intangible culture. We need to go beyond that. We need to give communities the agency to say, this is my culture, this is the way I practice, this is the way I want to safeguard, or I don't want to safeguard this. Yeah. There are complexities in wanting to safeguard a practice which could be most offensive to another community. And we see that all the time under the title of freedom of speech. Some groups that say this is our nationalistic views. You can have a rise of that. It was already happening. I am British. You can be only British if you are white. If you are black, you can't be British. The children who are born in Britain, what happens to them? And then, what is Britishness? Nobody can define what is Britishness yet. Yeah? Or people now saying they don't want to consider British. All the migrants consider themselves British, and the indigenous, supposedly, they call themselves indigenous, they are going to be the English people, or the Scottish people, the Welsh people. So there's a big debate. You know, for us, bombs happen, shootings happen, we get on with life. It's only a few individuals that create all this saga. We get on with our life, and this intangible heritage happens on a daily basis. We all join in, we have a good time, and we very appreciative that it